For more on this and what it can mean for the broader market, we are joined now by Melissa Otto. She is the head of TMT research at S&P Global Visible Alpha. Melissa, it's great to have you.
Hi, Trinity. Great to be here.
All eyes are on NVIDIA, as I mentioned. What are investors anticipating as we await these results?
As we come into the quarter, it's going to be a really interesting one. I think the critical thing that the market's going to be very focused on is hearing how the data center revenue is projected to do going into Q1 and for the rest of this fiscal year. In particular, what Blackwell is doing. Right now, Blackwell's expected revenues are really all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
We see in our data about $100 billion range in Visible Alpha consensus. And so it could go either way in terms of, we see bulls that are over $100 billion in revenue, and then we see bears that are below $40 billion. So it'll be interesting to see how the company guides and what sort of commentary they give around the B series and Blackwell.
How do you think the results will compare to overall market conditions?
There is right now a bit of a disconnect between the amount of compute and the transition to accelerated computing that's supporting the infrastructure for generative AI and the actual AI applications that are moving into production. Actually, we saw a decrease in the number of applications moving into production from the end of 2023 to the end of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is driven by the fact that it's difficult to integrate the domain into the top of the stack.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing more and more companies trying to focus on that and get those out, but it's taking time.
But how are investors approaching more optionality in this competitive space?
What do you mean by more optionality?
So when you see how NVIDIA's stock fluctuated, right, and you see more and more competitors entering this tech sector, how are investors approaching their strategy when it comes to investment?
Right. I mean, I think this year to date, we've seen a broadening out of the market, and investors are trying to understand how they want to be positioned with the big six mega cap tech stocks that have been so geared into this AI theme.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to continue to see the level of upward revisions and growth that we've seen over the past couple of years, just to put that into perspective, 55% of the S&P 500 has been driven by the mega cap big six tech stocks.
Yes.
And a third of that has come from NVIDIA alone. So as we look at returns and what's going to drive the S&P 500 over the next 2 years, investors are questioning, okay, where do I want to be? How do I want to be positioned? And what's going to ultimately drive that? And there are some big questions around that.
Exactly. And given all of the uncertainty, especially when it comes to the tech sector, how are you seeing them navigate through these challenges?
It's difficult, and I think this is really where bottom-up investing really comes out. Really understanding the data, understanding the drivers is critical, and understanding, okay, where are the valuations and the growth, and that's where I think investors are trying to see, okay, there's a bit of a disconnect right now in the tech sector. How do we rectify that and understand what we're actually paying for and what's actually driving that growth?
What are the biggest trends that are shaping the broader tech sector?
I think right now they're really trying to understand what is going to be the next big AI application.
Yeah.
And how that is going to change our lives. If we think about the iPhone, if we think about some of the tech innovations that we've had over the past 10 years, we really saw a lot of mobility and efficiency come into our lives. I know for myself, I'm doing conference calls on, in the car and all these different places. And, that's created a lot of flexibility in my life. Now what is generative AI going to do? How is it going to make my life more productive, more efficient? How am I going to be able to do things faster and better without worrying about the accuracy?
Now, I'm interested to get your take on what trend you think could specifically impact NVIDIA's performance.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are going to come out probably in this quarter. First and foremost, we saw from the hyperscalers very strong numbers around their CapEx spend.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, based on Visible Alpha consensus, the hyperscalers are projected to spend a whopping $330 billion this fiscal year, which is an increase, a substantial increase from this past year, this
Yeah.
past fiscal year. So that tells us that, okay, that transition to accelerated computing in the data centers is continuing. They value that. They believe that long term it's going to net a return. However, there is a bit of question in the market. Okay, you're spending all this money, but shareholders have not received the benefits of that yet. Okay, you're spending $200-300 billion in revenues. When does the rubber hit the road and we actually start to see revenues
Yeah.
as a function of that? And that's, I think, what the market's going to be very focused on around AI. And NVIDIA benefits directly from that CapEx because most of that CapEx is going into NVIDIA GPUs.
And I would be interested to get your take quickly before we go. I want to know how you think competitors are responding to NVIDIA's dominance when it comes to the AI space and data centers specifically.
And NVIDIA has carved out a very strong niche for itself because of its CUDA platform. CUDA is the default. This is what developers use to focus on, and this is really what NVIDIA has done very well. They have integrated, they're not just simply a GPU manufacturer, they have integrated a whole software component to their GPUs to create a solution and a platform that's going to ultimately provide an easier access to that transition to accelerated computing.
Well, thank you so much for all of that key insight. It was a pleasure speaking with you again. Melissa Otto, head of TMT research at S&P Global Visible Alpha.